What is up, everybody, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about one of those off-brand topics, which is not gaming but does have to do with games. And by the way, if you are in my community or do share social media pages with me and follow me, you'll be able to see that you can share content with me, whether it's content you want me to talk about, content that you find interesting. But this was one that came up in my community and has been popular in the news, which is woke content in the video gaming space. Now, I want to preface this with my personal set of beliefs and kind of put that out of the way. I'm trying to take this from a very net neutral perspective. I'm not trying to take sides with this, but more of trying to say, here's this side, here's what I think, and kind of separate those two things so that's clear. The group that I got shared was this Steam group here called Woke Content Detector. They've reviewed, I think, over 1,000 games. And in this, they have created a doc that's basically shows games they recommend, they don't recommend, and then games that have maybe sort of like the net neutral position. So let's talk about first, I think the most important, what is this group trying to achieve? So the goal of this group is to provide a way for people to share information about woke content and games. The group is open for anyone to join, and newcomers are encouraged to help us grow and improve through curated list of games. See the pinned topics and general discussions for subforum or more information about how we operate. People post topics basically about what it's about and their questions, but basically you can kind of like suspect what some of these comments say, like, you know, I hate wokies, cool group, I hate Overwatch 2, but I think just to start, you know, should this group exist? I think any group in the Steam community has a right to exist as long as they are not themselves trying to harm anybody or harass anybody directly. Then I think that this group can exist, just like you can have an opposite of this, which is basically don't play games that don't have, you know, I guess these woke principles that they're claiming. So I think both can exist in the space, no matter how extreme, as long as they're not harming anybody. And the idea is that people who join can, I guess, choose what they want to choose. So like, why is woke such a heated topic? So looking into the definition of it, woke is an adjective derived from African-American vernacular English, originally meaning alertness to racial prejudice and discrimination. Beginning in 2010s, it came to be used for slang for broader awareness in social inequalities such as racial injustice, sexism, and denial of LGBT rights. I will say, just to begin, I think woke is one of those terms sort of like clickbait, in that a lot of people use it sort of like willy-nilly back and forth to define something. Basically, either they didn't expect it or they just simply disagree with a topic. Woke is kind of one of those topics that I think on its own, woke is not a bad phrase. It's like awareness to something that's bad, you know, like, you know what I mean, inherently bad, such as racism. You know, I don't think it's bad for someone to inherently be woke in the presence of prejudice. I think where it sort of gets muddy in the waters is that secondary definition that was adopted later, in that it started to be just super broad and it's just used for everything. And so everything that's basically not the standard is considered to be woke if it's mentioning it, and if anything is mentioned that's, you know, like that has to do with sexuality or race or any sort of injustice in that type of way. So I don't think it's bad as a definition, and in fact, I mean, you can consider majorly during the civil rights movement, it would behoove somebody to be woke, because you would want to be on the side of ending those inequalities. So it's like in a prior type of sense, I could see how it's been sort of bastardized into this kind of this term that blanket terms for anything, but that's the definition, you know, basically as a basic definition. But let's talk about some of the games that are on here. So the first one I want to talk about is the not recommended section. So some of the obvious ones, like Starfield, contains pro-LGBTQ plus and overly pro-DEI messaging, diversity, equity, inclusion messaging, pronoun selecting, including the options for they, them, uses body type 1 and 2 instead of male, female, and probably diverse NPCs in all areas. In all honesty, if I were to say from my perspective, the only one I don't like is the last part right here, improbably diverse NPCs in all areas. I get that, like, whenever you think of like a future and outer space type of thing, your first thought is that, like, oh man, all walks of life. life, but that's not really how society works. Most people naturally, they kind of stay with their own sector of people because it's comfort and it's like it's home. And so like to always be like oh no, everyone is open and is willing to take in other people, or this, now that we're in the future where we're more open and progressive. I don't necessarily agree with that, but it doesn't necessarily bother me. The one thing that does bother me that I can agree with a bit is the body type 1 and 2. I don't think it's a bad thing to necessarily do that. Sorry, I disagree with the body type 1 and 2. I don't think it's a bad thing, because at a certain point, the whole idea is just kind of getting stale, because it's more about nowadays, like you see it so often, and that it's just kind of been it's kind of just standardization. Like just like you would before have male, female, now you just do body type 1, body type 2. It's a simple changeover. The only thing I don't like about body type 1 and body type 2 is that body type 1 is always the masculine one. Body type 2 is always the female, the feminine one. So it's like, we know what you're saying. Like we get what you're saying. But to me, that doesn't necessarily bother me, because body type 1 and 2, it just feels like standardization at this point, because any game that comes into it, if you're wanting to appeal to the main group, like your major group, as well as people who might fit that or might appreciate that, I guess, then why not just do it that way? It's a simple change. There's a simple change of text, I guess. But I'm not necessarily like up in arms about anybody who does this. So that was Starfield. Baldur's Gate 3. Let's talk about Baldur's Gate 3. It contains overly pro messaging, non-binary, other options available for identity, character creation menu, use a body type instead of male and female, optional, homosexual romance. So I hard disagree with the whole optional homosexual romance. To be honest, if you have such a problem with it, don't do it. don't make it an option. It's not like it's like you have to have the homosexual romance. If that was the case, then maybe I could see us standing here, but like it's optional. Just don't do it. It feels like a lot of people are projecting in this case. Additionally, Baldur's Gate is based in a game like Dungeons and Dragons. So in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, there is an infinitesimal number of possibilities of options that can happen, of scenarios that can happen. The running joke is that bards will sleep with anything. So why not make sense, like make that a possibility to appeal? And so this is my first major point that I'm going to talk about, which is I think woke content is okay if it appeals to the main group of people you're trying to appeal to. So Dungeons and Dragons is supposed to be a fantasy that's for everybody. It's a fantasy like role-playing game for anybody to do, for the jock to play a warrior, for the meager person to play a mage, for the smart and maybe the pious to play a paladin. You know, like there's supposed to be something for everybody. And so it's literally a game of inclusion. And so having those options makes sense to the main crowd of people. Now, if it was a thing that was like saying Conan the Barbarian, and they were trying to appeal to inclusion, to people who are more meager and meek, that wouldn't make sense to me. And I would say like that is an example of you're trying to appeal to LGBTQ, but like you're not. This doesn't fit your major crowd. Because I think what this ignores, and why this is a problem, is that it ignores the fact that people of the LGBTQIA+ community don't like this either. They don't like things being shoehorned in that don't belong. But you can't necessarily, like, I guess, blame them for wanting to play a game that, you know, has previously been how they feel included into the community. And Dungeons & Dragons has always been a game of, like, let's play. So Baldur's Gate kind of fits hand in hand with that. It makes a lot of sense with me. Hades, another additional one. Great game, but it says once again contains overly pro LGBTQ+ messaging. However, if you've ever read any sort of myth or like tale of the gods and goddesses and heroes, they fly both ways in the stories too. So it kind of matches with that. And I mean, more and often than not, they're impregnating women as like animals and stuff like that. So even furries is included in that. So I mean, like, you can't necessarily be like this is out of the ordinary. Like, no, that's pretty much in line with what the stories about the gods and goddesses is. So I don't think that really makes sense. The only thing that I can agree here In this statement. So it says the NPC chaos is non-binary. The NPC Deuce is says she's asexual. It doesn't even talk about the main thing that I think that I dislike about Hades is the race swapping. I think the constant race swapping of characters to check boxes, it doesn't make sense to me. The way that I can sort of make sense of race swapping in the realm of gods and goddesses is that the god of war in one area, you know, Greece, is not the same as the god of war in another area. You know, like everybody has their version of the god of war, right? Or like their representation of their deity, and that would be different depending on where you're at. But that's not what they're doing. It's kind of the traditional setup here. It's like Hades, Persephone, the gods and goddesses as you know them. So I think that doesn't necessarily make sense. They don't try to make sense of it, and that to me is just lazy. So that's where I would stand, but they don't even mention that in this group. So it kind of seems kind of like a silly miss in my opinion. So additionally, one that I was surprised to see on here was Elden Ring, and apparently it contains pro LGBTQ plus messaging, uses body type in place of biological sex during character creation. Once again, the biological sex instead of body type instead of the biological sex. I don't necessarily hold issue with it, but apparently when I Googled it, apparently Elden Ring contains a lot of like queer pro messaging, story, and lore. And so my major second point to the wokeness in video games approach is that I think that LGBTQ relationships are okay as long as they add something to the story by being present. If someone says that they're gay for the sake of saying I'm gay, it doesn't need to be there. But if someone is adding their personal beliefs and their stances on certain topics, their sexuality into the mix, if it adds a dynamic to the game, if it changes the game or the story or like how it functions because of that simple fact, I get it. Because we just like there isn't often places for these things to be mentioned just blatantly. I think it's difficult for games to do this properly. But honestly, if any game were to do it, why not Elden Ring, which is claimed game of the year and is honestly a solid game all around? Like it kind of seems silly to be like, oh, this game's not recommended for the messaging in the game when it was such a widespread success. So clearly this overly pro messaging wasn't enough to influence or make anybody feel like it was misplaced. So that leads me to believe that it's at least done well. So it means I don't think just saying that having relationships or having these this being present is a bad thing just outright. I don't think that's necessarily right. I think that's a miss. Additionally, going a little bit further, Cyberpunk 2077 is also on the list. So contains overly pro LGBTQ plus messaging, contains overly pro transhumanism messaging, features a trans character and flag, uses body types instead of biological sex, body modification, and courage. I mean, if any game was going to have positive pro-trans messaging, then why wouldn't it be Cyberpunk? I mean, a lot of people are modifying their bodies like to insane levels. And so I can definitely see gender identity sort of kind of being foggy or sort of a gray area in a game like this when people, I guess it's like to a certain level, it's like doesn't even matter, like doesn't even matter because they're more machine and they're identified as something else entirely by the rest of society at a certain point. So that to me is like, I get being like the presence of the flag and like maybe like screaming pro messaging everywhere else, but like the whole thing is about transhumanism. I think, I mean, as like the characters in that particular world, and the whole body modification, that's the whole concept of the game is like people get body modifications. So like, that just kind of, it goes in line with the story of the game. Like it parallels the game. And so to me, like, I don't know necessarily what you're trying to attack here. Additional one is BioShock Infinite. Contains overly anti-Western society and overly pro-DEI messaging. Columbia's residents are hyper-exaggerated racial caricatures of the 19th century humans. Heavy social commentary on racism. I don't know where they've been this whole time, but I'm going to talk about this later. They have BioShock 2 on their recommended list. So where were they the whole BioShock story? The BioShock as a story is supposed to be hyper exaggerated. The highest of the highs, like you're rich, you're powerful, you're very smart, but also the lows of the lows, because they had to, like, a lot of criminal industry was introduced. So it's supposed to be about that. It's anti-Western society because where it's based is literally right, like it's positioned, I think, within like 40-50 years of the Civil War, and that's when the society in the sky was created. So it's supposed to reflect those things. And if anything, there's a lot of French representation, because the Vox Populi is supposed to be like a parallel to the storming of the Bastille. So to me, it's more of it's taking on different revolutions, like multiple revolutions from different cultures, and putting it into the American society. So if you were going to attack anything, I would say it's in a way, it's kind of doing what Assassin's Creed, or the issue that people have with Assassin's Creed right now, is they're adopting, instead of adopting like feudal Japan, they're instead adopting revolutions and trying to mold it into one, and it kind of gets messy at a certain point, because it's like, what's truly the message here? It gets kind of muddled in everything else, because you're trying to do so much at once. So it feels like this is attacking the wrong thing, but also it's like, that's what the game's about. The game's about the characterization of certain beliefs in certain walks of life. So like what are we attacking here in reality? It goes after Overwatch 2. I mean, do I have to say much about Overwatch 2? It's literally, Overwatch 2 is a game about a ragtag group of heroes from all walks of life and different skills and abilities. I do understand what it's saying here, where it's saying like retroactively change the sexuality of many characters to be more inclusive. Because it wasn't obvious, like for at least a lot of the original characters, like they didn't make any sort of things to introduce their lore, but then it came a little bit later, or the cinematics came later. I will say a good cinematic will kind of save you in a lot of ways. But I can agree that things were retroactively changed, but the whole thing about diversity being a problem, I mean, that was kind of the concept of the group, is that they're really a whole bunch of different types of villains, a whole bunch of different types of heroes with different skills, and then you come together with different gameplay styles. Like it's literally a diversity type game, a diversity shooter, if you think about it in a way. So I don't 100% agree with this message, but I do understand where it's coming from with the retroactiveness of the like cinematics and some of the lore as well. So let's talk about some of the recommended lists now. So recommended lists, I might have trouble finding some of these because it's hard to browse them entirely, but Sekiro was the first one that I saw that kind of really stood out to me. And looking in it, it says contains no woke content. Apparently the Sekiro voice actor speaks out in support of gay shipping. Apparently voicing also in Red Dead Redemption 2, which I believe was on the not recommended list. But in Sekiro, basically a number of people had shipped or basically gay shipped the main character of the game, and a lot of people were upset about it. But I think most of those things got pushed down by the community and being against it, and that is why I feel like this is here. To be honest, it feels like this got placed here because there was, I think there was a stronger presence of people who were anti-shipping. I'm not for shipping personally in games. You can ship things in your head, but like trying to be like, oh, this is now the narrative everyone else needs to follow. I'm not for that personally. But for Sekiro, Left 4 Dead, Final Fantasy 6, Final Fantasy 13, a number of Final Fantasy games, but on the recommended list, BioShock 2 and BioShock 2 Remastered as well, of course. But something that came during this movement that I remember when BioShock 2 came out was that a lot of people were saying that basically BioShock was promoting brutalizing and sexualizing of women. But honestly, whenever the game came out, nobody was talking about the game being woke or anti-woke. And for the people who were anti BioShock Infinite, they retroactively went back and they included gay couples. You just may have not seen them, but there are gay couples in the city of Rapture, at least in high society. So they do exist there, and just they're not highlighting them because the game is not necessarily about sexuality and those type of things. It's about really society as a whole and how a society handles the pressures of greatness, but also the folly of man. It's really, I mean, more than anything, it's a political game. And a lot of people who are the anti-woke are anti-politics in games. I mean, BioShock, it for sure is a political game. It's anti-corporation, it's anti-capitalism, not because of the values that are promoted in the society, but because it falls apart. It crumbles at the seams. So clearly it's trying to make a statement about how in a hyper condensed society where it's supposed to succeed in its most way, it falls, and it falls hard, and everything falls apart, but also in a gruesome and terrible way. So I think that to say that like BioShock 2 is recommended, BioShock Infinite is not recommended, doesn't make a lot of sense to me personally, because the society is about freedom, but it's also about how the people of the highest realms of society can essentially like be who they want to be away from the confines of the world. Now, just like I said at the beginning of this video, that's freedom to do as they please, and also freedom to do for people who don't like them as they please. So it's like the freedom of both to exist is what it's all about. So a number of these are in here. I'm going to scroll sort of slow through this as I finish up and talk about this a little bit more. But a number of these in the recommended list, I feel like were put here, not necessarily because they contain no woke content, and that's the only thing. A lot of these, if you're pausing through this, you'll notice that the main character doesn't talk at all. There's not necessarily voice lines or like really deep messaging that's said in these games. These games are kind of more of just, you play it, you put it down. And I think some people are appealed to that. Some people don't want to have to think or deal with the society that they currently live in when they're playing video games. I understand the existence of a group like this because it's trying to say something about how often these games that inadvertently try to place diversity, equity, inclusion, and LGBTQ plus presence and pro messaging in their games, it seems clunky. It seems like it doesn't belong. And like I said earlier, I think there's situations where it can belong, where it can be there, but I don't think necessarily that it means that it's all bad, it's all good. All I'm saying is, if you're going to go after the wokeness of something, don't go after like the main idea of the game. If the main idea of the game is to appeal to this, then I think that has a total right to exist. Whether you agree, disagree with my messaging or what I'm trying to say, I'm gonna try to include the link to this in the comments. Let me know, and if you're one of the group members and you would like to like chat about this sometime, or maybe mention where you're coming from in some of this, and where this list started and why, I would love to hear it. And of course, like I said before, if you'd like to share any sort of news or messaging within the video gaming community, I'd love to cover it. And I hope this video was helpful for you. And I hope this can sort of make a positive effect on how you approach games in the future, and whether you consider them just to be woke or not. But until next time, catch you in the next one. Peace.